From the language app Babel, this is Multilinguish. I'm executive producer Jen Jordan. This week, we bring you 3 unsolved language mysteries, from obscure glyphs discovered on Easter Island to a theory about an isolated New Mexican tribe that upends everything we've been taught about human migration. And finally, a book from the 1500s, written in an untranslatable language with strange illustrations. Later on in the episode, the whole team is back to share what they learned this week. First up, producers David Duchin, Steph Koifman, and Thomas Moore Devlin each bring us an unsolved mystery. You'll also hear producer Dylan Lyons chime in. Let's get into it.
So we've got 3 unsolved mysteries regarding language today, and the first one we're going to get into comes from David.
So I actually didn't know much about Rongorongo before doing research, and it's actually really cool because there's so much mystery still surrounding it. Rongorongo is a script that comes from Easter Island, which is also known as Rapa Nui, with the same name given to the language of the people who live there and who've lived there for centuries. And it's thought that they settled the island in probably 1200, sometime around there. But when the first Europeans to come around the mid-1600s, and then eventually like throughout the rest of 1700s, 1800s, came to the island, they essentially decimated the population. There were Peruvian slave raids too. And so what we have today is a population that speaks some of the native language, Rapa Nui, but it's taken a lot of different forms throughout time. And it's also kind of borrowed elements from Tahitian. A lot of the islanders speak Spanish. So that's like kind of framing the context for why it's really hard to figure out what this script means. So the script was found by, or kind of uncovered by this French explorer named Eugene Araud. I think I'm saying that right? Araud. I don't know, like however the French would say it. But he came to the island in the mid-1800s and found this script, which was written on tablets of wood and some other artifacts made of stone. And it looked like it contained a bunch of glyphs, kind of like hieroglyphs that you'd see in ancient Egyptian. But he didn't know how to read through it. And other linguists who've taken a look at it don't really know what it means. So what they've deduced is that so far they have 26 artifacts that exist in museums throughout the world. None of them are actually on the islands themselves, but they're carved with these glyphs that represent about 120 different things, from plants to wildlife, specifically a lot of fish. There are like human figures who are doing some actions, like there are compound glyphs, which incorporate people, like a man, but an action as well, like eating something. They look pretty cool in terms of like how, I don't know how you rank glyphs as cool, but like
what were they eating?
I don't know. It was kind of just like a man sitting like with his hands up as if he was gonna like put something into his mouth.
Like eating a bag of chips.
Like eating a bag of chips.
It's more like a sandwich.
Yeah.
You don't eat chips like that.
So give us some context. So Easter Island is...
Where's that again?
Yeah, where is that
Pacific?
again?
So it's in Polynesia, technically way west of Chile. So Easter Island now is part of Chile, but I don't know when it kind of got incorporated. It's easiest to get to from the western coast of South America. That's the closest point. But it's one of the world's most isolated, if not the world's most isolated island. It's like 1,200 miles away from the nearest civilization of 500 people, at least. And then it's like many hundreds of miles away from the coast of South America. So it's hard to get to.
Well, but Easter Island is known for those gigantic statues,
Yeah,
right?
I was thinking
of the same.
It's like the thing from Night at the Museum, right?
Yes.
Gum Gum.
Yeah, Gum Gum. And they're called moai statues. They're people. They're like actual human figures.
Yeah, they're massive.
There's an emoji.
Yeah.
So
it's
there's an emoji.
It's this incredibly isolated place with these gigantic statues and this language. So theoretically, it would have been an indigenous language, I'm assuming.
Right. So it would have been Rapa Nui, but the old version before it kind of like got morphed throughout time and absorbed elements of Tahitian, like I said, like a lot of Spanish elements as well. So the problem is that the people living today who speak Rapa Nui speak a different version of it that wasn't around in the mid 1500s or 1600s or even 1700s when this script was thought to be written.
Oh, so they don't know what it says.
So they don't know what it says. Yeah. And like also so I mentioned that French explorer Eugene Araud,
You
who
pronounce French words in this podcast.
I might be
Upsetting.
completely butchering it. But
I'm gonna probably butcher some words later too. It's okay.
he noted that even when he went in the mid 1800s, he noticed that the islanders living there treated these artifacts with not disdain, but like they really couldn't care less about how they treated them. Like they would use them as fishing reeds and wrap fishing line around them. They would keep them in their house and like put stuff on them. So it's clear that they didn't even know how to interpret what they said. The idea is that this text is actually just proto-writing, probably more decorative or meant to kind of be a record of an oral narrative. So if you're like telling a story and you want clues to help you along as you tell it, you could use this tablet, or that's why they like inscribed them to be able to recount oral narratives, but it's not supposed to be read or deciphered as if it were an actual language. So
it's like Cliff Notes.
Cliff Notes, yeah. And a lot of sites that I've researched on refer to it as proto-writing, but the idea is like no one is living today who can actually decipher what it says, and there's probably never going to be someone who was born who can, because the old language is from hundreds of years ago has changed so much to today. But all we can do is kind of map out what glyphs exist. We think that there are about 120 of them. Maybe try to figure out what they mean. The pictures are pretty obvious, and I can show you. Actually, here's kind of an
Maybe we'll
overview of
link
some
to
of the
this.
glyphs.
Yeah, we'll link to this
Yeah,
because
Yeah.
showing us is a bad. Oh wow!
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah.
actually like pictures.
They're actually pictures, yeah.
They're more complex than like a hieroglyphic would be, like the ones you would think of from Egypt.
Mm-hmm. More like pictograms. Is that what they're
Yeah.
called?
Yeah.
That
The
sounds very
original
official.
emoji.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly.
They are. They're like emojis.
Yeah.
another theory that this script was invented 1777, I believe, when the Spaniards were signing a treaty with the islanders, so that the islanders could cede some of the land to them. There was some sort of exchange of land or like territory or sovereignty, and the islanders had never seen like a Western script written out with a paper and pen before, and so they just like came up with this sort of like glyphic system to represent, like to be able to sign a document, and then it kind of just expanded a little bit from there. But no one knows why these 26 tablets or artifacts carved with obsidian stones, or I think even some shark tooth was used to carve them. Like no one knows what they were for. We can't read them. We're not even sure if it's a language to be parsed and read. And so it means that we'll probably just live on with these tablets never really knowing the truth.
Interesting. Well, thank you, David.
Of course.
Yeah.
Enlightening. We'll post the pictures of the glyphs, pictograms. I don't know what the technical term is.
They're glyphs.
Glyphs.
Also maybe pictograms.
In the links with the episode, so everyone can see them, not just us.
Yeah.
Steph, you're going to tell us about the Zuni people, right?
Yeah. And so actually, the word Zuni is a Spanish adaptation. Their tribal name is Ashiwi. Again, probably butchering that. I'm sorry to anyone listening. So the Zuni people are one of 19 Pueblo tribes that are currently living in modern-day New Mexico. But they are not like the other tribes around them. They actually existed in much more relative isolation, and linguists believe that the integrity of their language has been preserved for at least 7,000 years.
How have they been so isolated? Are they living in like just like a completely remote area, or how does that work?
I'm not really sure. I think that the isolation shows up most strikingly in the language and in their religious customs.
Got it.
So, like the way that they sort of worship their gods. There's no kind of clear, direct ties to any of the tribes around them. And so the mystery part of this, it actually comes from one woman. It's Professor Nancy Davis from the University of Chicago. She has been developing this theory since 1960, that the reason the Zuni people are so different is because they actually came in contact with Japanese Buddhist monks in the 14th century.
Oh, wow.
And this is kind of a disruptive theory because it would disprove the commonly held theory that we've accepted about like when human migration happened and like when people came to the Americas and all of that.
Yeah, how would that would completely disrupt in the 1400s?
The 1300s. I think it's the 14th century.
I didn't even know there were Japanese monks in what is now America at that point.
Well, I don't think that that's the thing that a lot of other people think either.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is like kind of just her explanation.
Well, that's why it's so disruptive, because I was like, wait, is there a huge gap in my knowledge of my country? Apparently maybe we just don't know.
Maybe they met in the middle at Easter Island. They needed a little get together and traded some secrets, learned each other's languages.
And they wrote it all down.
Something those Rapa Nui never thought to do.
So they ate some sandwiches and took pictures about it.
Had some tea.
What makes her think it's Japanese related?
So the basis of her theory is that there were some really beyond coincidental similarities in their language and their religion and their blood type. And so, you could look at, some people would say that these are false cognates, but, she sort of focused on similarities. Like, for instance, the word for priest is shiwani in Japanese, but it's shiwani in Zuni. And then the word for clan is kwai in Japanese and kwei in Zuni. Again,
sounds similar.
Pronunciation might be off, but you get the picture. And then there's also, so both Zuni and Japanese place the verb at the end of the sentence, but as far as I understand, that's not terribly uncommon, but it's just another thing that she pointed out.
And blood type was similar?
Yeah, so they both have a high occurrence of type B blood, which is super common in East Asia, but not among Native Americans.
Interesting.
That's the part that's interesting to me is I guess it's possible to have differences in blood type in different people, but all of those things together
it is
very interesting.
Yeah, and she also noted that they had similarities in tooth shape and skull configuration and this kidney ailment that they both apparently were susceptible to.
Very interesting.
She dug deep.
Yeah. I mean, there haven't been any DNA tests to prove it either way.
Wait, how did she find out about, say, dental?
Tooth shape.
Tooth shape?
Well, I think she was an anthropology student.
Okay.
So that's kind of
I guess.
Something you study in anthropology.
But isn't that kind of getting into the realm of phrenology, which is a
that was my bad.
But phrenology is when someone's living and you feel their skull to tell them things
how smart
about
they
themselves.
are. Yeah. I think it's different if you're comparing
I think anthropologists and people who actually look at skeletons are doing it much more scientifically.
People who look at skeletons. I
forgot what the word is. I forgot.
Skeletologist.
What the actual
my skull
word
feels
was.
pretty great right now. Anyway.
Mine doesn't. I have a very bumpy head, actually. I don't know what that says about me.
It says nothing.
So in terms of language isolationism, did anyone ever draw conclusions between Zuni and Basque? Because Basque is in the mountainous region of northeast Spain, but it's completely separated linguistically from all of its neighbors.
Yeah.
And no one can really, there's some theories about where it comes from, but no definitive answer. It seems like this is a very similar situation.
I think it's a similar situation. I think ultimately the jury's still out on this. She kind of proposed this very interesting, compelling theory, but I think most people think that more evidence is needed.
So I was going to say, are other researchers on board, or they're kind of skeptical?
I think there's a lot of skeptical people. I mean, her anthropology professor, when she first wrote her master's thesis comparing the languages, apparently took one look at the first paragraph and said, "Go back to Alaska and do something respectable."
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
But she didn't let that deter her. She spent the next 30 years researching this and ultimately published a book on it.
all right.
So
Man, I love really sassy academic people. Because to everyone else, it's just sounds like, oh, that's an interesting theory. But then in there, it's just you stupid person.
Go back to Alaska.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So do you want to hear what her theory actually is, though?
Yeah.
It's super cool. So she thinks that Japan was subject to all these natural disasters and earthquakes in the 11th and 12th century. And so Japanese sailors were leaving the country in waves of migration at that time. And she sort of honed in on the last group to set sail, which was around the year 1350. And this particular group was led by a group of Buddhist monks who were in search of the center of the universe, which in Buddhism, it's the middle world.
Huh.
And they ended up washing up on the shores of California instead.
Can you imagine making the trip across the Pacific Ocean from Japan? I can't.
Oh,
I like
no.
boats, and I think I would absolutely lose my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I also like the idea that California is the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Californians may think so.
We should cut that out just because people from California will think that out.
It sounds like a Beatles song.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a theory.
Yeah.
I mean,
And nobody has, I'm guessing because it would require a lot of resources, both academic and otherwise, to disprove it, but has anybody actively tried to like show reasons why she might be flawed, or is it just picking apart? Like, this seems unlikely. It seems to be the biggest, like...
As far as I know, I don't think that there's been, like... I don't think anyone else has spent 30 years researching the fact that she's wrong. Like, I don't think that there's been an equal sort of, like, you know, effort to disprove the theory. But, like, I think some of the common arguments against it, like I said before, is that the word similarities are false cognates. And then some people have also pointed out that Japanese have 20% occurrence of bee blood, and then the Zuni have 6%. So, like, you know, I'm not a biologist, so I don't really know if that's, like, a big deal or not, but maybe it's not enough of a link to really matter.
Yeah. I wonder if DNA testing would show anything interesting, or if it would be too difficult to try to find, like, a equivalency.
Yeah.
But,
well, then the other kind of, like, interesting thing that she pointed out is, you know, they had these sort of, like, similarities in their religious cosmology. So, like, both cultures had a lot of ocean symbolism. And then, like, you think about the Zuni people in New Mexico and, like, where does that come from?
That's interesting, yeah.
And then also she found echoes of the Chinese yin and yang cosmology.
What is that?
Like, the kind of, like, you know, dark.
Is it like a symbol?
The black and white.
Like, there's always dark
90s.
existing within light and light existing within dark. And so I think she kind of found, like, a similar sort of...
Interesting. They have, like, Eastern religious influences. The ocean thing is definitely weird because they're in the middle of the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, theoretically, you would never see the ocean in New Mexico. So it's a very interesting concept. But anything else you wanted to add?
That's it.
No, that's super interesting. Thanks, Steph.
No problem.
And then Thomas.
All right. I bring to you today the Voynich Manuscript. I don't actually have a physical version, but let's pretend that I do. So let's take it on out. Whump noise as it lands on the table in front of me.
Visual aids.
Dramatic.
Referencing on a podcast. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. Voynich Manuscript. It is a 234-page tome that's filled with this weird language that no one can decipher, and it's just like these symbols. So that right away is a mystery. But I think what makes it even more interesting is not necessarily the language, but the drawings, because they're really weird. So as we page through this fictional book, you can just see it's like kind of like a combination of like astrology and herbology, and there's also just like a bunch of naked people in a hot tub together and drawings. It's just...
Sounds like a good time all around.
Yeah, it's a great time. You can look at it and, like, basically the one thing that everyone kind of agrees on is that it has to do with medicine. And that's kind of like, all right, we've got that.
Because, like, I remember the pictures you showed us before, and we'll obviously post these so everyone can see. They're, like, very colorful. And there's a lot of, like you said, like, people, but also, like, plants. And
lots of
I
plants.
didn't realize there was a hot tub picture.
I didn't see the hot tub. I want to see the hot tub. Not sure what medicine that is.
I think ancient mysterious cultures had a lot more fun than we give them credit for.
I think it's probably more likely like a hot spring thing.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Giving them too much credit.
It looks like a hot tub. Well, maybe I'm just imposing my
Maybe
ideas.
it's like I'm so sorry.
It's okay, David.
Very academic theory coming up. Maybe hot tub time machine. It's like they took the time machine. It's like based on a true story, and they went back in time to when the Voynich Manuscript was written. And the people who wrote it were like, "Wow, we saw this hot tub from the future. We need to document this," and that's what they did.
Go back to Alaska and do something respectable.
So when do they think the Voynich Manuscript was created?
Let's take a hot tub time machine back to the early 15th century, which is based on carbon dating this manuscript. We can know that is when this paper appears to be. And it also believed that, based on the markings, it's from Italy. The first any hard evidence is that when this was found, there was a letter in it from August 19, 1665, written by Johannes Marcus Marci, maybe, which said that the manuscript was sold to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II for money. And so that kind of places it there. And then also the letter said it was written by Roger Bacon, which was later disproven. And also like that kind of throws in extra weirdness to it. But eventually the manuscript was added to a collection of papers that belonged to a Jesuit scholar, Althanius Kircher. And so between 1670 and 1912, no one really knows what was going on. But it was eventually found in this group of papers that were being sold by the Jesuits, and it was purchased by Wilfrid Michael Voynich, and therefore it's his name that gets attached to it because it's the Voynich Manuscript.
Interesting.
And he found it, he opened it up, and he's like, what is this?
Seems like a good read.
And that's the question that we're still going.
Seems like a good reason to name it after him.
Yeah, I have to imagine that if it weren't for the drawings, it'd kind of just be like, I don't care that much.
Could it just be like doodles? Someone was just having fun one day, or they were bored in class.
I mean, possibly.
There's actually writing, though, too.
Yeah. So, as to the language, it's called Voynichese right now. So, unlike the other mystery languages that we've talked about here, like, this is not like a language done by a culture. This manuscript is it. There's no other evidence of it anywhere in the world. And so it's that fact that kind of immediately after it was found in 1912, it caught on like a lot of attention. And people just started like, people immediately claimed to have solved it. And then like it was later found out, oh no, you didn't. You just kind of made some assumptions. And that's kind of the pattern that's been going on ever since. And people have devoted their entire lives. There was one person who spent 40 years studying this off and on. He did other stuff, but like...
Good.
It's like the white whale.
Yeah.
So wait, so when did Voynich acquire this?
1912.
Okay, so theoretically, since he acquired it, people have been more intrigued by it, even though it was sort of lost in history for hundreds of years.
Yeah, I mean, because it was lost and it just kind of popped up, some people thought that it might be a hoax.
I mean,
which
it
could be, and also the letter seems so weird, but it's believed it's not to be a hoax because first of all, the carbon dating did say that it should be from the early 15th century.
At least the paper is, right? So.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's another analysis of the language itself, and so basically, the frequency that the characters show up in the language seem to mirror how a real language would work. There's this thing called Zipf's law, which is used to forecast. So like if you take the English language, some letters are used more than others. And it's like A is used a lot, and Z is used a lot less. And using this law, it can be applied to pretty much it can be applied to any language where it's basically there'll be a grouping of letters that are used a lot and then letters used less. And it's incredibly hard to fake that without knowing Zipf's law, which they wouldn't know in the 15th century if it's a hoax from them.
I mean, it's basically just Scrabble. So maybe someone had a Scrabble tile and they're just mixing them up.
It is kind of. As a side note, they're trying to, not necessarily Zipf's law itself, but they're trying to redo Scrabble now because like the actual points don't go to how frequently the letters are used. And so some people are like...
Scrabble is linguistically inaccurate.
Exactly.
I love Scrabble.
Throw it away.
No.
But that's not relevant to here.
Sorry, that was my insane... I'm just going to keep throwing insane theories out at you and you can keep
That's great.
during the course of this episode.
So the manuscript was introduced to the world early 20th century. Right away, there was this guy named William Romain Newbold who said that he'd found it, and people were like, great. But then there was an article written a little bit later by Speculum, and it was like, this is total nonsense. For Newbold to have been right, basically, the person who wrote it would have to have had the ability to see into the future 500 years, because it like forecasted things that had not happened yet. So Voynich Manuscript is great. It has a cult following. If you look up Voynich Manuscript, you can find a lot of websites devoted to people solving it. They all look like they were built in the early 2000s. There's like interactive portions, and the comment sections are filled with hate. Because it's like almost like people don't want it to be solved, because as soon as anyone does claim to have solved it, immediately people are like, actually, that makes no sense at all, you utter fool and moron. Didn't you consider this aspect?
Oh, gosh.
So like everything on the internet.
Yeah.
But also once you solve it, it becomes less interesting, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't stop people from trying.
It's true.
I'll talk about two of the most recent like theories that were popular, but then didn't pan out necessarily. There's this one by this guy named Nicholas Gibbs, and this got a lot of attention because it was published in the Times Literary Supplement over in England. And
when was this?
This was in September 2017.
Yeah.
So he said the language was based on a Latin shorthand and that the entire manuscript was based on this woman's health text from the 15th century, which he didn't really translate any of it. And people were like, this doesn't actually make sense because all of the grammar of the Latin would have to be completely incorrect. And also the idea that it was based on a woman's health text had been like discussed before. So it's basically everyone was like, this seems both wrong and also half of this we already kind of thought. So, shush. The other theory is kind of more exciting because, like, we've been working on this for over 100 years now. I say we. I've just been following along life.
For 100 years.
But the main, like, thing that you'd think, like, oh, well, now we have high-powered computers. Why can't we just get this to attack it?
Right.
Get the robots to do it.
Yeah, we love robots. And so there was this paper published in 2016 by computer scientist Greg Kondrak and his student Bradley Hauer, and this gained a lot of traction in the media in 2018 for some reason. But what they decided to do was to take Voynichese and think of it as a substitution cipher. So think back when you were eating your bowl of cereal and the decoder ring would fall out,
Yeah.
and you could use the decoder ring and every letter would correspond to a different letter.
Okay.
I didn't eat that cereal, but sure.
You
You
know.
have decoder rings?
Well, think of, I'm really making reference to A Christmas Story.
Right.
Yes.
He locks himself in
I
the
do
bathroom,
remember that.
and it says, like, drink your Ovaltine.
Ovaltine, yeah.
Or
Brand's
something.
making content. It's the worst.
Yeah. Anyway, so they thought it was something like that, where this person, like, wanted to make this encoded text, and so it's based on a real language, they said. And so all they had to do to solve it was basically compare this language and see how it compared to, I think they ran it against 380 languages.
Just 380.
Yeah, just 380.
Okay.
There are 7,000 in existence today that are still living, and that's not even counting the ones in the 15th. But they took 380 and decided to see if it matched any of them. And they eventually came to the conclusion that it matched Hebrew, and they translated some of it, and they were like, this is great. But there
There's
were
always a but.
problems. So first of all, it compared the manuscript to modern Hebrew instead of 15th century Hebrew, which there is a pretty big difference, actually. I know more about Hebrew now because I wrote about it, and Hebrew was a dead language during that time period, and now Hebrew has been revitalized and has gotten inflections from Yiddish and a bunch of other languages. So
Right.
that'd be different. And also a red flag, it assumed that every single word had the letters mixed up. So, like...
Like those little, what are those unscramble puzzles?
Yeah, it's like a jumble and a substitution
Jumble.
cipher. And also it's based on
And
a
also,
language.
every word is an anagram.
Yeah.
Who had that much time on their hands?
I mean, again, computers can do it.
Mhm.
But, like, this kind of seems like a bad sign. But I think the worst of it all was that when they were doing this, they happened to use Google Translate.
No.
So, I mean, I don't want to completely crap on Greg Kondrak's life. And obviously, like, this does show, like, how we can try to use these modern methods to try to crack it. But everyone kind of agrees now, like, this is cool, but no, this doesn't make any sense.
So it's still unsolved.
Yeah. And as Jen was saying, like, I don't think anyone really wants it to be solved. Because it's probably just going to be like, we solve it, and then it'll be like, step 1, apply this herb to your wound. That'll be boring.
What if it cures an illness
Yeah.
that we didn't know about?
What if it's a blueprint for how to build a hot tub time machine?
I hope that's actually what it is.
I really
because
hope
that would
that.
be the best reveal. We need that kind of news right now, I think.
Yeah.
And that technology.
Look forward to Hot Tub Time Machine 3, there was already a second, where they go back and find out the origins of the Voynich Manuscript.
I almost wonder if there's any, like, are there any astrologers who are trying to crack the code? Because I feel like if there's, like, if people think that it's related to astrology and herbology, it's probably, like, you know.
Yeah, I don't know, because I think kind of what they've settled on is, like, there are diagrams of, like, astrology,
Mhm.
and I guess it's just like, yeah, this is what we do. And so they don't see the need to devote the rest of their lives to cracking the language.
Can you view the entire thing online?
Yes.
That's amazing.
So after 1912, the book changed hands a few times. Voynich, the man, died, and it passed on to his heirs, and eventually was donated to the Yale University Beinecke Oh no.
Beinecke?
A library at Yale.
Yale's library now has it, and they uploaded it someone recently so that anyone can see it, and it's great.
Link in show notes.
You can also buy now an actual physical edition of it.
Oh my god, why haven't you bought us an edition?
How much does it cost?
I've been holding out.
Know?
How much I buy?
I think it's like $50.
Buy it, and
That's
then
not bad.
Steph will dedicate her week next week to translating it from the astrology perspective, and then we'll become famous. This seems like a foolproof.
We should crack the code.
Absolutely.
Multilinguish is brought to you by Babel, the language app. Speaking a language with confidence, and choose from 14 different languages, including Spanish, French, and Polish. Dylan, what's something you learned recently with Babel?
Well, I've been studying some French with Babel, and particularly focusing on food vocab, because that is the most important thing in my life.
Of course.
Yeah, and so one thing that I thought was kind of funny that I found out was that breakfast is le petit déjeuner, which means little lunch, because it's like a little lunch. It's cute, you know?
Is there a word for brunch?
Brunch? I don't know. Probably not.
Oh.
Maybe.
No.
I don't
I
know.
probably still like le brunch.
I'll find
Le
out.
brunch. Yeah.
Get back to you.
We're offering Multilinguish listeners 50% off a 3-month subscription. New customers can get this offer by visiting babbel.com/podcast. That's BABBEL.com/podcast.
Welcome to the roundtable section of Multilinguish, where we talk about what we've learned this week, because every week we produce a ton of content around languages and culture, and want to share a little bit of that with our audience. So Dylan,
Yes.
what did you learn this week?
This is fun. Okay. Welcome to the round table. I like that word. So I spoke with a U.S. Marine. He's actually it's called a cryptologic linguist for the Marines. He was. He's no longer. But basically, it's really interesting. So the whole way the military language program works is really cool. So you can take this test when you enter the military.
ASVAB, right?
Yeah.
Just like the weirdest acronym.
ASVAB. I don't like that much. But it basically determines how qualified you are for certain special positions within the military. So the guy I spoke with did well on it. And so he took another test called the DLAB, Defense Language Aptitude Battery, great acronyms all around, to see how good his linguistic skills are. And basically they use a made-up language, so you don't actually have to speak another language, but they test you based on how well you understand this made-up language and the grammar rules, and it basically just determines how good you are at linguistics.
So just determining a pattern in a language. So that makes sense though, because if you're actually trying to parse a language, even if you don't become totally fluent, knowing if it's a noun or a verb and being able to identify that kind of makes sense.
Exactly. You know how it works as a language. And so once you get past that, then you go to their special school, the Language Institute, the Defense Language Institute, DLI, in California. And you spend a long time there learning different languages, or learning whatever language you're assigned to. And it's very immersive. So you spend all your time, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, learning about the language and the culture. And then toward the end, you end up being kind of secluded in this little hotel type of thing with the other people learning that same language and your professors. And you just speak the language all day, every day for the last week or two of this program. And you eat together, and the whole time you're only allowed to use the language. So you get it down really well, which I guess is important if you're in the military, because you need to know the language.
It's literally life or death.
Yeah.
The funny thing that I took from that interview that you did is you only get like to choose top 3, but you don't actually get to choose which language you learn, right?
No, yeah, you come with a list and you're like, these are my top 3 choices. I'd love to learn Spanish and French and maybe German. And they're like, no, you're going to learn Bosnian because that's what we need right now. So it's you can have a little bit of choice, but it's usually just whatever's needed at that time. But yeah, it was a pretty interesting conversation.
What's cool. And that's what you learned this week.
That's what I learned this week.
Steph, what did you learn this week?
So I did an article about the linguistic origins of New Orleans food. So I learned a lot about, well, I mean, a lot of people know that New Orleans is kind of like this like unique cultural melting pot that's sort of unlike any other city in the United States. And
I don't know because I've never been, and I'm bitter about it.
I think you're the only one on the team who hasn't gone yet.
Oh, that's so sad.
I was just there.
Me?
I'm just, I was just there in November, so I'm rubbing it in.
Yeah. Got it.
But basically, you can sort of take apart the etymology or the contested etymology of a lot of these food names, and you can sort of see all of the influences at work. So, for instance, you take a dish called gumbo, and a lot of people have this misconception that gumbo is basically just like a Creole version of, I can't pronounce it. It's a French seafood stew called bouillabaisse. I can't.
I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it.
I'm sorry.
It's probably like the American.
Yeah, it's definitely not the totally right way.
I've ever
but
taken French.
Yeah, I apologize to everyone listening, but so the word gombo actually means okra in just about every French-speaking country, which was once a key ingredient in the stew. I don't think it's like sometimes like people today kind of make it without it or with it, but I spoke to a culinary historian, Jessica B. Harris, and she said that the word gombo actually comes from a word that means okra in the Bantu languages. It's kinngombo, or a variant of the word. So there's kind of like this like strong linguistic tie to West Africa, which is like, a lot of the cultures there have okra soups and stews, which New Orleans gumbo is very similar to. So you can kind of go down the list. I have a whole thing about jambalaya, the po' boy sandwich, the mufuleta, etouffee, congri, and kalas, which are sweet fried rice fritters that...
Oh my gosh, I'm so hungry.
Yeah. But it was really interesting. I mean, a lot of these dishes, it's kind of like, there's kind of like a multiplicity of theories that it's kind of hard to totally pin down because, some people say it's this, other people say it's that, and you can kind of see the case for like so many different origin stories.
Is a po' boy like a sub?
It's...
No.
I don't actually know.
He's never been to New Orleans.
Hoagie, sub, there's a million words. Isn't po' boy just one of them?
New Orleans explain this to you.
So it's kind of like... It's made with this crusty Italian bread that's usually kind of hollowed out, and then there's fried oysters and seafood inside of it.
Not a sub.
It's sub-adjacent. It's sub-adjacent, I think. Yeah.
On a similar, equally academic note, when I took the cocktail tour in New Orleans that I recommended Thomas take as well with his entire family.
Yes, we all got very drunk.
By noon. The organizer of that tour talks about how some of the most famous cocktails and punches in New Orleans actually have all of these different origins based on like the trade route. So the Sazerac is a super famous New Orleans based drink, and like the sugar came up from the West Indies during like the sugar route, and the absinthe came from French people, and it's just a really interesting way to see like the melding of cultures. Thomas, what did you learn this week?
So in a similar vein, I've also been writing about food a lot recently.
We do like food.
Yeah. So my most interesting word that I discovered was turkey, because did you all think that turkey was connected to the country Turkey?
No, not at all.
I felt like I was told it was not at all, because people were like, you can't just say that a country is a bird, Thomas. I guess I can. So I thought that they were separate, but then I learned recently that actually turkey is named... The bird is named after the country, because hundreds of years ago, the country Turkey would import these birds from West Africa and then have them brought into Europe through Turkey. And so during that time, they were called, don't laugh, turkey cocks, which was eventually shortened to just turkeys. And so that's different from the American bird. But when people went over to America, they found a similar looking bird and then just called them turkeys because they kind of look a little bit similar if you look at the pictures.
So wait, so they're birds that look like turkeys that were shipped around from Turkey, but then the turkeys in North America are what we know as turkey now.
Yes.
But did they still call the other ones turkeys?
No. They stopped. They're called guinea hens because they're from or guinea fowl. So they stopped calling those. It's just a weird thing. And then the people in actual Turkey, when they see American turkeys, are like, those aren't Turkish. So with that accent, exactly. And so they call them Hindi because they looked at the bird and decided that looks Indian. And so it gave it the word for India, which is weird.
That's actually, in Russian, the word for turkey is it has the root like indus, like.
Yeah. So it's got to be the same sort of thing. So it's just basically no one understands the bird and no one really likes it that much either.
I was going to say, I feel like Turkish food is probably a lot more flavorful than turkey.
Well, yeah. I think didn't guinea hen have a moment a while back? And I feel like I had some, and it was way better than turkey.
I believe
they're smaller.
I mean, turkeys, they're hard to prepare, and then you have to douse them in gravy for anything to taste decent.
Yeah.
Do you have something that you learned, Jen?
You guys teach me something new. Several new things every week.
Aww.
One of my bucket list items for 2019 is to go to Copenhagen. I've been wanting to go forever, not just because it's the home of the Legos, but it's supposed to be a really cool place to go. I had a lot of friends who studied abroad there, and I did not, and I still have a little bit of FOMO. And I read an article, our Danish writer/expert, Birte, wrote for the magazine, and she's talking about silent consonants and sort of like how to approach Danish pronunciation. Basically, there are less Danish speakers in the whole wide world than there are people in New York City, which is pretty crazy. And they're also known as like some of the most fluent, like best English speakers in the whole world. So there's no way I'm going to have to learn Danish to go there. But I still really wanted to like figure out, it's so different than any language I've studied. I wanted to look at it. And basically they are masters of these silent consonants, which I know we've talked about in Russian and some of these other sort of like silent letters that crop up, or sometimes the extinct letters that like we don't use anymore. And apparently Danish is just lousy with these silent consonants. And so there's this whole, I won't go through all of them, but basically like the discrepancy between what's written and how it actually sounds is really, really difficult. It's like the most difficult thing if you're learning Danish, is to like actually look at the word and pronounce it, which I struggle with in English. So It's a little bit daunting. But some of the examples she gave are, if you see a G anywhere besides the beginning of a word or syllable, you can be pretty confident that it won't be pronounced.
Why put it in at all?
There's a letter combination H and V together. It's a relic of Old Norse, which I know we've talked about, sort of the root of all Scandinavian languages. There's a lot of those really funky looking, like the A and the E squished together, the O with the slash through it. I'm sure, Thomas, you have the more academic terms for those letters, but I won't ask you to recite them on the spot.
How do you pronounce the A and the E thing?
I mean, it depends on the language. I know
it depends on the language. It depends what consonants are between, too, doesn't it?
Yes. And the A and the E together, I say ah, because in the, like, International Phonetic Alphabet, that is the sign for ah. So I'd like to think that that's...
So, like... I don't know if y'all ever read The Golden Compass, but they always talk about the
Damon.
The Damon. I always pronounce it Damon. It's D, the A-E-M-O-N.
Like Matt Damon.
The Damon. And I was like, I don't know how to say this, so in my head I'm saying Damon.
I said Damon too.
Is it Damon?
It's Demon.
Oh,
well, they made a movie. Did you see it?
We'll find out then. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
All right.
It came.
All of that.
It came and you missed it.
It's out?
The Golden Compass came out years ago. Religious groups were like mad because they killed God. It's Philip Pullman.
Is there a new one coming now?
That sounds like a good place to end. Maybe we'll talk about it in a future episode.
I'll report back on The Golden Compass.
All right, thanks, guys.
Multilinguish is produced by the content team at Babel. We are
Thomas Moore Devlin.
David Duchin.
Steph Koifman.
Dylan Lyons.
And I'm Jen Jordan. Ruben Vilash makes us sound good. Our logo was designed by Ali Zhao. You can read more about this episode's topic and even more on Babel Magazine. Just visit babbel.com/magazine. Say hi on social media by finding us at Babel USA, all one word. Finally, if you like what you heard, please rate and review this podcast. We really appreciate it.
I think that all the people who are trying to solve these language mysteries are looking in the Rongorongo places.
Oh
The
no.
message for them. To anyone trying to solve these mysteries, you need to really expand your mind and go on a voynich of knowledge. And those will be the ultimate answers.
We're canceling this podcast. It's over. It's been a good run, guys.
I hope you're not recording
Yeah,
anymore.
the podcast ended 5 minutes ago.